Hello, everyone. This is the 120th episode of the Soccer Nostalgia Talk Podcast. As always, this is Sean from Los Angeles and the Soccer Nostalgia blog. Unfortunately, Mr. Paul Whittle from the 1888 letter blog could not make it this time. For this episode, I interview Serbian podcaster Mr. Damir Bojić as we discuss the Yugoslavia National Team during the 1984 UEFA European Championships. Mr. Bojić is on the Serbian podcast Na ivici ofsajda, which means on the edge of offside. I hope I pronounced it correctly. Well, welcome, Damir.
Hello, Shahan.
Can you introduce yourself and your trajectory into football?
Hello to you and to all the people who are following you. Yes, I'm doing this radio show. It's actually pronounced na ivici
Oh,
ofsajda.
sorry
So
about
it's
that.
pretty much no worries. I've been doing this podcast for like last 6.5 years. I'm doing it with two of my colleagues, Stefan and Alexander. It's more of a radio show because I'm a journalist actually by education. It's a podcast about, it has some kind of also nostalgia in it, but it's basically about like some kind of a social impact on the society. And in our work, we try to have that to kind of cover it and discuss the things that are currently happening in football, but also the things that were interesting in some other periods and some also players, some icons, some interesting things that happened during the past, and also Yugoslavian football, Yugoslavian World Cups, Yugoslavian Euros, such as this one, and disasters of Yugoslavian World Cups and Euros, such as this one.
Let's go back in time. What was the state of the affairs with the Yugoslavia national team following the disappointing 1982 World Cup?
The interesting thing is like the World Cup 1982 was the one that was probably the worst one in the history of Yugoslavian football. In this sense, like what were the expectations and what kind of happened. And the similar thing is with the 1984. It's just like those two competitions were the ones that were like the most for the generations before. Like I'm from younger generation, but for those generations before, they was like the biggest disappointments that we had in Yugoslavian football. During the World Cup 1982, Yugoslavia was really good, did the qualifications really good. In the press, of course, the Yugoslavian, but also in like European press, it was kind of perceived as one of the favorites, like Brazil. For me, like my favorite football was the Brazil 1982 with Brazil, Argentina, and of course Italy. And the thing was that the expectations were because Yugoslavia was the first in the qualification group and above Italy, who ended up winning the World Cup. And they were like some kind of, I wouldn't say it affairs, but they were like some things that were not that much related to football. That kind of had an effect on the team and the way that games happening. It was pretty much obvious that the things are not going according to the plan. I discussed this because we did some kind of a special for that World Cup 1982. I was discussing these questions with Predrag Pasic, who was a member of that team, who was playing in the qualifications, but he didn't play any game at that World Cup, unfortunately. He was one of the, I wouldn't say scapegoats, but he had some kind of issues with Miljanic at that time, the national coach and national manager, and also because he had some problems with him. Like there was like some things that happening in the press. What were the expectations? What was promised? What was delivered? And things like that. And then actually Pasic finished his career then, and Miljanic wasn't no longer the national coach. Came Todor Veselinovic, and the expectations were once again high, but the results didn't really start that well regarding the beginning of the qualifications.
Can you discuss the trajectory of the new Yugoslavia manager Todor Veselinovic as a player and a manager up to this point?
I come from Novi Sad, second largest city in Serbia, and Todor Veselinovic is a legend of football club of Vojvodina, who was two times the winner of a national league, Yugoslavian league. He was like a prolific striker. He was like one of the best that Vojvodina ever had, and was part of the generations. Like we didn't ever have those kind of golden years, but like the best period when Yugoslavia was really participating in every competition and going to sometimes semifinals and things like that. That was like during 50s and 60s. He was known as a very respected football player. His career, he played in Vojvodina. He did play 1 year for Partizan, but that was during his military service. During that time, yeah, Vojvodina didn't have that kind of a big of a success. And when he was 30, like 30, 31, he went to Sampdoria. And for me, there is some kind of a link between Vojvodina and Sampdoria. That's always like, I think that we could say that everything started more or less here with him and Boškov, and of course Siniša Mihajlović and some other players that played for Vojvodina and Sampdoria. After that, he finished his career in Austria, and he started his managerial career, you can say, in Austrian football. He didn't have any kind of a real success after he was in Colombia as well. He was in Greece in Olympiacos. He was also the manager of Vojvodina. He didn't have any kind of a real success until he left the position of the national team coach. So he did just the qualification. So from 82 till 84. After that, he went to Turkey, to Fenerbahce, and won the title. For these qualifications for the Euro Cup, he would be unfortunately remembered for the fact that he used almost like 60 players in these 2 years, which is like an absolute record. I do not know if any other national coach did that.
Let's discuss these Euro qualifiers. Yugoslavia were in a group with Wales, Norway, and Bulgaria. It started badly with a loss at Norway, but ended in the most dramatic fashion with that match against Bulgaria in December 1983. Can you walk us through these very dramatic qualifiers?
There is like an interesting thing for these qualifiers because nowadays, of course, everything is played basically in the same time. Yugoslavia played the last game against Wales, and then 7 days afterwards with Bulgaria. No other team had that kind of, let's say, chance. Yugoslavia started with the loss from Norway, and in that match they came like with those high expectations, but they with really low expectations from Norway. They treated them like they are amateurs, they're not that good. They didn't really come as professionals as they should have in that match, and it's interesting that also that was the last game for two of the players that were like really important before, Vladimir Petrovic Pižon and Dusan Savic. Pižon definitely because he was one of the most important players in the World Cup 1982 squad, and also like he had the role like in the late 70s, early 80s. After that match, maybe that was good for Yugoslavian team because it was quite of a shock. So they needed to come in the games that came afterwards. They needed to prepare like more professionally for those games, and they just like to be more serious and to take those games more seriously, which they did in some way. Yugoslavia played the next game against Bulgaria in Sofia, and that match they won. It was 1-0, and then there was this famous game against Wales that was like it was a roller coaster because like first it was 1-0 for Wales, then it was 3-1 for Yugoslavia, then it was 3-2, then 4-2 for Yugoslavia, then Wales scored 2 goals later in the game, and it was a tie. After that, the next match was once again against Norway, and this time Yugoslavia won. But just to say, like Yugoslavia was leading like by 2-1, conceded a goal in 89th minute. So it was, those minutes with really high pressure, but somehow they managed. And then there came these two last matches against Wales in Cardiff, and the last game that was played in Split against Bulgaria. The match in Cardiff, Yugoslavia was losing by 1-0 against Wales, which was very good opportunity for Wales to qualify directly. But later in the game, Bajdarevic scored, and it was 1-1, so Yugoslavia managed to get a tie. But still, the Wales was in a good position before the last game because if Yugoslavia and Bulgaria would tie, Wales would go through. And then this game came. It started very bad for Yugoslavia because Bulgaria was leading by 1-0. Sušić managed to score 1 goal in the first half and then the beginning of the second half, and it was like 2-1, but Bulgaria managed to score afterwards, and it was 2-2. And then there was this famous goal. It was like in all the TV show, like I think this is like that goal, and the legendary modern TV commentator, like his passion at that point, the way that he was commenting that last minute of the game, it was totally unbelievable. As I say, like it's known to our generation also that that moment it was 2-2, and but the Yugoslavia managed to score. Yugoslavian defender came in because everybody was already in the final third of Bulgarian defense, and then Radanovic managed to score, and Yugoslavia managed to win that night in Split and to go to the Euro Championship.
Let's present some of the mainstays of the national team in this 1982 to 1984 phase. You have the likes of Nenad Stojkovic. You mentioned Safet Susic, who was playing at Paris Saint-Germain in France. You have the Vujovic twins, Zlatko and Zoran of Hajduk Split, Zajic of Dinamo Zagreb, also Kranjčar of Dinamo Zagreb. From Red Star, you have Milos Sestic and Radanovic, you mentioned. And you have also Sulejman Halilovic of Vinkovci. And also Ivan Gudelj from Hajduk Split.
Those are the players that I remembered, like Šestić, Sušić. In the generation 82, there was, of course, as I said before, Vladimir Petrović or Ivica Šuljak. Like, so very technically gifted players, very creative players, the ones that you would go to the stadium to watch. And Yugoslavia had a lot of those kind of players. Like for the Euro 1984, there were like Blaž Slišković was one of the most favorite players in Yugoslavia, I would say, but he didn't have that kind of presence in the national team because of his, let's say, not that much professional attitude towards the game. These players were known for their technical skills, but when it comes to the team play and and especially like defending and things like that, like I would say more the tactical approach to the game. The Yugoslavian team wasn't up to the task because it was the way the Yugoslavian football was played was like something that was done 20 years before, things like that. Also for this qualifications and for this Euro, there are like, as I said, like some of the players from 1982 that were very important players like Vladimir Petrović, Ivica Šuljak, Edhen Šljivo, no longer the part of the team. In 1984, had some new players, but also some new gifted players. I would say like one of the most important one was, of course, Dragan Stojković, who is now the national coach of Serbia. This competition was his first big competition, for his first Euro. Unfortunately, because of the wars during the 90s, his next Euro was in the year 2000. Ivan Gudelj, unfortunately, had this medical issue. He was one of those players that were, we could say, like modern player in that sense. His career was to be like one of the best probably in Yugoslavian football, but unfortunately, due to his medical issues, medical problems, he couldn't continue his career, which will remain like one of the saddest stories of Yugoslavian football. The thing is, like we mentioned all these offensive players, but the way Todor Veselinović was preparing his matches and started from the first game at Euro, it was very defensive approach. We can say it like that. And the way the players were training their own clubs. In this squad at the Euro 1984, there was only one player that was playing abroad, that was Safet Sušić in Paris Saint-Germain. But all other players were from Yugoslavian league. That's something that is unimaginable today, of course. But the thing is like the way that the football was played in Yugoslavian league and it was played in some other leagues in Europe, it was not at the same level. But I think the most important difference is the way how it's done when you have those international breaks, how the players are prepared, what is the tactical approach by the national team and then by the football association, how do they approach those things. I think that that's something that is not being done good in modern times in Serbia, I could say definitely, because they would just come and play a game. They don't have that kind of really tactical approach to the game. They don't work on their defensive strategies and things like that. I would say like in Croatia is only different, but all other ex-Yugoslav countries, they still have the same issues we had like now it's 40 years ago.
You already mentioned that Veselinović slowly started from the beginning, started discarding Vladimir Petrović and Dusan Savic and other foreign-based players. Why was there an opposition in those days to call up players who were based abroad?
There was a tendency to not call the players from abroad because their games weren't watched. It was like once they left Yugoslavian football, they are no longer part of it in some sense, but that wasn't the case with all the players that you mentioned. Safet Sušić, who was still playing and was playing afterwards, even on the World Cup 1990. But to be completely honest, when we talk about Petrović and Savić, this was like the start of qualifications, was their second seasons in Europe, and their first seasons were not that good. With Pižon, Vladimir Petrović Pižon, his first season in Arsenal, and that was like, let's say, mediocre season. Maybe he didn't have that kind of a chance to play and to show really his talent and all the things that he's been doing in Red Star before. A similar thing also for Savić, who was in Sporting Gijón. He like when you look at their stats, not just stats, like but the way they were playing in those clubs and the time they've had, like how many games they had and how did they fit in those teams. So it's kind of they were not at the same level we can say they had been when they were in Red Star. Just saying that to be fair to Veselinović. That season, 1983-1984, was like the season when they started in some other clubs. Was kind of perceived when the player would leave. And it's also in Yugoslavia, you could leave after the age of 28. So basically, players in their 30s were not really invited to the national team, apart from some example like Safet Sušić, of course.
You already mentioned as well that Veselinović called up like around 60 players in this 2-year phase, and many of them for a handful of caps at most. Was it a sign of indecisiveness on Veselinović's part?
Definitely, if we can say anything about Jose Veselinović, that he was indecisive, like the facts say it, we don't need to. I see this some kind of a need for a shock treatment. As I said, like the expectations in Yugoslavia were very high for the World Cup 1982. The result was like a total disaster. And then came the 1984 qualifications that started how they started. So like we will do this, now there is this result, then like we cancel everything. We'll start some new players. And I think that the high expectations from the media for putting pressure on Veselinović, and he was constantly trying to do something to make some kind of a result. But basically, that was not doing this, like inviting all the time new players. And you can see, I think there were only like 2 players that had over 30 games in the national team, which is kind of strange. You need to have like some very really experienced players, like the most experienced one, Safet Sušić and Zlatko Vujović. And Zlatko Vujović at the time had only 25 years. Like, so this kind of pressure for a result, but that was the pressure, but there was no serious strategy. And maybe that kind of approach was doomed to fail, like because if you do not work on something, if you don't have a strategy, if you don't put any effort, then you cannot have a result. If you just like constantly do this kind of shock treatments, then nothing's going to happen. And that's kind of a question of Yugoslavian football. Maybe that's something with our mentality. We can say that we want things now. We want things to happen now, and we want good results and everything to happen if they can instantly, because we have this kind of living in the moment thing, like, like just you are expecting of the life highest things at the current point. And I think it's just like if the thing is, after this Euro Championship, that kind of thing kind of changed. After Ivica Osim came, like 2 of the main competitions, let's say not discarded, but it was just like we are preparing something new. And like, so the Yugoslavia wasn't in the World Cup 1986, wasn't in the Euro 1988, but Yugoslavia was at the World Cup 1990. That team was really, and Ivica Osim was all the time there. Miljanic was now in the Football Association. It was kind of like there was some kind of a plan what needs to be done. There was also the plan what needs to be done with the generation in the 90s, because in 1987, Yugoslavia was the champion of the Youth World Cup. There was some kind of high expectations what should happen in the Euro 1982 and all these competitions that the Yugoslavian team never showed up because of the wars. I would say like this 1984 Euro Championship, the good thing that came after that was that from now on we need to change something. We need to really change this football that we've been playing for 20 years. We need to have some kind of a strategy. We need to have some kind of goals and to work on it and then just deliver. We need to have players that like go through stages. They play for younger teams, then they play a small role in the national team, and then gain more. When they gain more experience, they will have like a higher role. and you would have like some kind of a construct who is in the team, who are the key players, who like there were some kind of ideas, all the things that were lacking in the 80s.
More importantly, Veselinovic gave first caps to the likes of Dragan Stojkovic, Faruk Hadzibejic, Mehmet Bazdarovic, Tomislav Ivkovic, and Sreko Katanic, who would be mainstays of the national team into the next decade. An aspect of Yugoslav football that many may not know about was this concept of military service.
Mhm.
At some point in these 2 years, the likes of Zlatko and Zoran Vujovic, Jerolimov, Blas Sliskovic, Nenad Stojkovic, Milos Šeštic, and Pasic were unavailable as they were doing their military service. Can you explain this unique feature of Yugoslav football?
Yeah, in Yugoslavia it was like that. If you can be an artisan, you can be a doctor, lawyer, or footballer. You need to do your military service, of course, if you are a man. I think that comes from the after the Second World War and the victory of the partisans. It was proceeding in the culture. Military service was an important thing for every man to do. It was basically done at the beginning of your 20s or something like that. Some footballers would do it earlier, some footballers do it later. With the military service, it's not like just like a thing. We have it even nowadays. It was more in like the socialist countries, but like in Soviet Union, you, for example, didn't have it. It was some kind of a Yugoslavian thing, and the thing is, the way football changed, it became more professional. Losing like 1 or 2 years would mean a lot. That kind of affected their careers, and like all these players that were like starting their career, like being at the beginning of their careers in the late 80s, were like discussing that how much they lost because of that. Yeah, it wasn't the same thing doing that in the 50s and in the 80s, and it was kind of there's something needed to be done for Todor Veselinovic, who did his military service. While he was doing his military service, he was playing for the Partizan, and Partizan was the army club of Yugoslavia. That way was his way was like that. But afterwards, if players couldn't play, they could train and they could, but it was of course not at the professional level.
Let's look at the preparation friendlies in the year 1984. On March 31st, they defeated Hungary. Then, in the final phase of their preparations in June, they defeated Portugal 3-2 and Spain 1-0. Both of them away matches. Was there a feeling after such impressive wins that Yugoslavia might actually have a good Euros?
Definitely. The thing is, with these two games, even like Todor Veselinovic was like really, really optimistic because of these two games. And when you see the way how the Euro quals ended with that late minute goal, there was like a euphoria. And these friendlies really against like strong teams as Spain and Portugal, and like to win away, it was kind of like okay, now we have some chances. And also when you see that in the group, like okay, France was absolute favorite. It was the France was like also the host, and there was Platini. I don't know, it was like the strongest team definitely. But Denmark and Belgium, Yugoslavia was objectively saying the quality of the players was a stronger team. I was checking some data and stats, and I saw that Yugoslavia had the better games ratio with all the teams. That Yugoslavia was better in games that they played with France and Belgium and Denmark. Yugoslavia was better than all of those teams, like in the like history and up until this game. Like Yugoslavia was expecting that they will go for the group, definitely go to the semifinals. That was expecting from the media. That was also that what Todor Veselinovic was saying. Even some of the players and like also some of the former players when they were discussing the Euro quals. So yeah, the hype was high, I would say. Yeah.
Let's discuss Yugoslavia's final 20 selected for these Euros by Tedor Veselinovic. At number one, we have goalkeeper Zoran Simovic of Hajduk Split. Number two, Nenad Stojkovic of Partizan Belgrade. Number three, Mr.Bojić of Zaleznikar. Number 4, Sreko Katanec of Olimpia Ljubljana. Number 5, captain of the team, Velimir Zajic of Dinamo Zagreb. Number 6, Lubomir Radanovic of Partizan Belgrade. Number 7, Miloš Šeštic of Red Star Belgrade. Number 8, Ivan Gudel of Hajduk Split. Number 9, Safet Susic of Paris Saint-Germain in France. Number 10, Mehmet Bazdarovic of Zaleznikar. Number 11, Zlatko Vujovic of Hajduk Split. Number 12, backup goalkeeper Tomislav Ivkovic of Red Star Belgrade. Number 13, Faruk Hadzibejic of Sarajevo. Number 14, Marko Elsner of Red Star Belgrade. Number 15, Branko Milius of Hajduk Split. Number 16, Dragan Stojkovic Pixi of Radniki Nice. Number 17, Josip Kop of Hajduk Split. Number 18, Stepan Deveric of Dinamo Zagreb. Number 19, Sulejman Halilovic of Dinamo Vinkovci. And number 20, Borislav Svetkovic of Dinamo Zagreb. Initially, Miko Durovski was in the squad, but he was replaced by Boris Svetkovic after he was injured. Were there any players that the press clamored for their inclusions but were omitted for these Euros?
Yeah, but I don't think like after the qualifications ended the way they ended, then after those friendlies, it was not that high pressure from the press who should be the part of the team. It was just like because after like exchanging like almost 60 players in these 2 years, like the media was already expecting that like just pick 20.
We come to the Euros in France, and Yugoslavia are in a group with the hosts France, Belgium, and Denmark. The first match of Yugoslavia is on June 13th at Lens against Belgium. Now, this is a Belgium side with the likes of Jean-Marie Pfaff in goal, Frankie Verkouteren, Erwin Vandenberg, Jan Sulemans, and of course the 18-year-old Enzo Schifo of Anderlecht. For this match, for Yugoslavia, the starting lineup is Simovic, Nenad Stojkovic, Gudel, Katanec, Zajic, the captain, Hadzibejic, Zlatko Vujovic, he'd be replaced by Svetkovic in the 76th minute, Šeštic, Susic, Bazdarovic, he'd be replaced by Dragan Stojkovic in the 59th minute, and Halilovic. Belgium would win this match 2-0. Erwin Vandenberg opened the scoring in the 27th minute. Just before the halftime, Belgium scored their second goal when George Groen headed in a corner from Schifo. Yugoslavia would not find a way in the second half, and they would lose this match, this opening match, 2-0. Was it already game over for Yugoslavia?
Yeah, if you ask Todor Veselinovic, no. It didn't come that much as a shock because it like we were used to that like high expectations, and then when you need to deliver, then everything just falls down. The thing is like before that game, Todor Veselinovic was talking about some offensive approach that now we will play, I don't know, our way of football and things like that. But basically, this game they did not approach it that way. I think the Zayats was talking about this game that like it was kind of we needed to be more concrete, more offensive, but we were not. The 11 players that Veselinovic shows, it seems that it seems like a bit defensive. And the approach in the media, like before the game, Veselinovic was talking about this kind of a offensive approach, and that like play our way of football. But in fact, in the first game, you could see that this wasn't the case. And it seemed that Yugoslavia didn't have any kind of idea how to create an action and not to score a goal. Even the Belgian coach was talking about that Yugoslavia was really like that they were not afraid because of the friendlies, and it so like that it seemed that Yugoslavia didn't have any kind of idea how to score, how to create an action. Even and so yeah, that was it was a big disappointment. But of course, after the game, it was like, oh, okay, we lost this one, but we will win against Denmark and try something against France. But
So the next match was on June 16th at Lyon against Denmark. Veselinovic makes 4 changes. So Simovic is out along with Hadzibejic, Šeštić, and Halilovic. And they'll be replaced by Ivkovic, Milius, Radanovic, and Svetkovic. Let's remind ourselves this is a Danish team who would be the surprise of these Euros, with the likes of Morten Olsen, Frank Arnesen, Soren Lerby, the young Michael Laudrup, and Preben Elkjær. So Yugoslavia starts with Ivkovic in goal, Milius, Nenad Stojkovic, Katanec. He'd be replaced by Halilovic in the 46th minute. Zajic, the captain. Radanovic, Zlatko Vujovic, Gudel, Svetkovic, Bazdarovic. He'd be replaced by Dragan Stojkovic in the 23rd minute. And Safet Susic. And this would be Halilovic's 12th and final cap for Yugoslavia. His first cap had been in 1983. Everything goes wrong for Yugoslavia in this match. As early as the 8th minute, Arnesen scores for Denmark. In the 16th minute, Berggren doubles the lead. That's after this that as early as the 23rd minute, Veselinovic pulled off Bazdarovic and replaced him with Stojkovic. In the halftime, again, Veselinovic gambled and he took off Katanec, the central defender, and put in a winger, Halilovic. But that didn't help. In the 68th minute, Arnesen scored with a penalty kick after Gudel had fouled Elkjær in the box. In the 81st minute, Preben Elkjær scored a 4th goal. And 2 minutes later, in the 83rd minute, Lauritsen scored the 5th goal. It was an unprecedented loss for a team like Yugoslavia. There were the 4 changes that he made from the first match to the second match that may have disrupted the team, especially changing Simovic, who had been a starting goalkeeper the entire season. It's also said that Veselinovic actually collapsed in the locker room after this match, and a doctor had to examine him, and he even stayed overnight in a hospital. And at the time, they said it was like exhaustion, but no heart trouble. That's why I think he did not give the press conference after his match. It was his assistant, Ante Mladenic, that did the press conference.
This was like the highest defeat ever. It was just like the total catastrophe for Yugoslavian football. I just wanted to say, like, when you discussing Danish players, like the one thing like came to my mind, like this was like when you see those young at that point young players and then the careers they made, like I was just thinking about Laudrup and Chifo from the Belgian team and like Stojkovic, but it's like an interesting thing to see all these players. Their first major competition was this one. As for Yugoslavian, those are those shock treatments that we discussed before. Like you can do a shock treatment once, but you cannot like continue doing shock treatments. If you do that, it means that you don't really have an idea what to do. Like you're just expecting something, but you are not prepared to deliver. As you said, like Simovic, he was not just like the starting goalkeeper of Yugoslavian team. He was like one of the most important players. So he was like the core of that team. And just to change him after the first game and then put Ivkovic and then that to have that unlucky moment the way Ivkovic conceded that goal and to start a game like that, that's like a total catastrophe. You can expect it at that point. It was like in the 8th minute and then another goal. And this change you make like in 23rd minute, it really shows that you really don't know like what were you preparing them for. If they are just like you're gonna change everything after 20 minutes, and then again like you see like you're out of ideas and everything goes against you at that point. So it kind of seemed like that for me, like to change, okay, like to change a couple of players. First game wasn't that good, and then you make that kind of a change. But if the approach is the same, if the team, the tactics are the same, if you're preparing them in the same way, then you cannot really expect that the result would be different.
Yugoslavia were out and had one more match to at least save some honor. And they were playing against the host France, who were unstoppable at this point, with Michel Platini at his best form ever. For this match on June 19th at Saint Etienne, Veselinovic decided to have a 4-5-1 formation with Nenad Stojkovic at left back, Milius at right back, and at the center to have Radanovic and Zajic, and Susic would be the lone striker. For this match, we have Zoran Simovic back in goal. It would be his 10th and final cap for Yugoslavia. His first cap had been 1983. So we mentioned Milius, Nenad Stojkovic. This would be his 32nd and final cap for Yugoslavia. His first cap had been in 1977. We have Gudel, Zajic, Radanovic, Zlatko Vujovic. He'd be replaced by Deveric in the 60th minute. Dragan Stojkovic, Safet Susic, Bazdarovic. He'd be replaced by Katanic in the 84th minute. And Šeštić. Surprisingly, Yugoslavia take the lead in the 31st minute when Šeštić scores with a beautiful shot from the outside of the box. This was the first goal France had conceded in the tournament. But this woke them up, and in the second half, Platini was on fire and he scored a hat trick with a shot, a diving header, and a free kick. All Yugoslavia could do was to pull a goal back in the 80th minute with a twice retaken penalty kick. In fact, Radanovic missed the first kick, and then when it was retaken, Dragan Stojkovic scored. It was a 3-2 loss. All things considered, it was a better performance for Yugoslavia, but it ended a disastrous tournament. And we have to mention that during the match, the Yugoslavian team doctor, Božidar Milanovic, he collapsed in the 52nd minute. He was 53 years old, and he passed away on the following day at a hospital in Saint Etienne.
I think all those kind of things had an effect. The goal that Yugoslavia scored, okay, decision to put, okay, it was Yugoslavia was out, and that was definitely. But let's end with some dignity and honor. And then there was this idea to put Stojkovic in the first team, like only 19 years old at that time. Yeah, it started very good, but then the thing is, like, yeah, that was the first goal France conceded, but the first goal Yugoslavia scored this Euro. That was what the best of Yugoslavian football, like what Yugoslavian football is. That kind of attractive approach, like those passes, dribblings, and things. Like I think that was for me, at least, like the best goal of the tournament, like the most beautiful goal of the tournament. But it showed kind of what Yugoslavian football can offer, and it was like a really nice way to say goodbye. But afterwards, yeah, then Platini started to score. It was his, I think, yeah, it was his second hat trick. He scored
Yes.
like so in the game before one hat trick. So it was like he was unstoppable. This thing that happened with the heart attack, like that definitely had an impact on the players. Like they like to the hospital and everything. It's just not on the players on the field, but I think that like the players that were like like some things are more important than football. That kind of had an effect definitely. And the situation at the end, like concealing goal, that was maybe some kind of let's say some kind of introduction what Yugoslavian football will be in the future, like who's going to be the new key player, and that was Dragan Stojkovic's decision, just like he's starting for the first time for the Yugoslavian team, and then he's taking the ball and he's scoring a penalty like a player from 19 years. So that was kind of an approach that we can expect from Dragan Stojković, who was then playing in Radnički Niš. He was not still playing in the Red Star. So it was like saying like, okay, this is a footballer that we can count on in the future. Maybe there's something for us in the future. But to lose against future champion of Europe 3-2, like in the way they lost, this kind of result was maybe expected before the Euro, but the first two games were definitely not expected.
So let's discuss the aftermath. Predictably, after such a disaster, Veselinović was on his way out. In the decades since, have reasons been given as to why the team performed so poorly after such good displays in the friendlies prior to the tournament?
As we discussed before, the reasons why the team acted so poorly is just because it was always that lack of strategy, lack of planning, lack of everything, and all just going from pure inspiration. It's like in that kind of like era in football, like now with more professionalism, definitely Yugoslavian approach was not adaptable. This was kind of it couldn't really give some kind of results. Yugoslavian football had always talent, that was definitely, but when it comes to that tactical part, it was lacking. Maybe if 1982 was a shock, 1984 was an aftershock, and it's just kind of really that was at that point like we need to change, definitely we need to change something. That happened because decision to put Ivica Osim as came a bit later, but the decision to put him to and decision to like sacrifice like for Euro 1988, like just was like okay, we are creating some new team, we just want to have some kind of a, let's say, to create some kind of a culture, like just to have some kind of for the players when they come to play for the national team, they know what to expect. They have like they roles, and it's not like let's call them and then let's give them a chance to try to play. Like I don't know. I know that sounds like really naive, but it was basically the way Yugoslavia played at that Euro Championship, like for especially first two games, was really naive. The thing that was required, like the thing that we needed to change, is to approach more serious, which happened more seriously, and to think further and to have some kind of a plan, to have some phases of the plan, things like that, and that kind of changed. Definitely, this Euro Championship helped in that, and unfortunately, we never got a chance to see what Yugoslavian football would look like in the 90s, but the thing that we can see like how Croatian football is now really creating like amazing results, and that's just like when you check it like that, this talent that comes from these spaces, but with some kind of professional approach, can give you great results.
Which players were regarded as scapegoats? I remember because I know Susic did not play again until he was recalled by Ivica Osim in 1988. Was he or others blamed for these performances?
Yeah, I think that the one that was the most to blame was unfortunately for him Ivkovic, because of that unfortunate mistake he made. But Sušić was probably the player that was one of the scapegoats because he was the most talented one. He was the main player, we can say like that. He was the most experienced player in that team. Yeah, he was the one to be blamed. But I think the one that was mostly blamed was definitely Veselinović, because the public was expecting more, and in his indecisiveness and his temperamental way of coaching, that was even ridiculed in the media.
In your opinion, what were Veselinovic's main errors?
I would say like the main errors were that, yeah, of course, like that easy one to say, it's that constantly changing players. Like if you keep on doing that, and even if you have like the best idea in the world what you want to do, like with your team, how do you want to coach them, but if you keep constantly changing players, if you keep constantly like it's impossible that you have like, if it's like almost 60 players, it's impossible that you have like 5 different teams. It's kind of impossible. That was the main thing. And the other thing that I would say, but it's not just regarding Veselinovic, it's regarding the way the Yugoslavian football was managed. It's just like how the association approached and everything. It's just the way the football was done. It was just like, as I said, like from like the decades before. It wasn't modern at all. Players would just come, and the thing that was lacking is more of that club culture, let's say it like that. If you have like 1 week with players a couple of times in a year, it's very hard to just have some kind of tactical ideas realized, and then it's better just to do what the best you can during that time. As I said, that was the problem, I think, in Serbian football. I think that's the problem up to this day, because it's the thing that I never understand is like if you play and then you have a defensive approach in your game, like but you do not practice defense. Okay, Serbian national team now doesn't have a defensive approach, but like the defense is bad, and it's bad. I remember like some of the best defensive players in the world before, but like when they're playing for the national team, for some reason that doesn't work. And it doesn't work that because you don't when you have that time when you work with the players, it's just like the couple of days working, but like without any kind of proper training. I think that with Veselinovic, some of the things he was responsible, yeah, were like that kind of constantly changing team, but the other things was just the way the Yugoslavian football was functioning that day. And I don't think like any other national coaches would have had different kind of experience. Definitely not losing 5-0 to Denmark, but like maybe some other result would have been, I don't know.
At the time, in an interview with France Football, Veselinovic blamed that every season the players wanted to join foreign clubs and he had to start from scratch. He also blamed the short preparation as they started on June 1st as the league ended on May 31st. He blamed the lack of professionalism and the low pay that forced players to leave the country for foreign clubs. He also said that he chose 20 players per UEFA regulations, but four of them came as tourists. I leave it up to you to guess who those four players were. But also, now this was the analysis of France Football. They said that the players seemed tired in the matches. As we mentioned, the league had ended on May 31st, and the players had no break in between. They immediately had to go to preparations. The other observation they made was that Yugoslavia had employed a 3-5-2 formation against Spain and Portugal ahead of the Euros, with Šestić as the key man. But against Belgium, he was placed on the left flank and again was absent against Denmark. According to France Football, only Stojkovic, Svetkovic, and to a certain extent Susic did okay as far as the players. Afterwards, did the press suggest that certain absent players may have made a difference, such as, let's say, I don't know, Vahid Halilhodzic at Nantes or others?
Yeah, that was, yeah, of course, that was definitely the case, because like the players who were not present, they should have been invited. But the thing you said, Veselinovic's explanation why this kind of thing happened, some of those things are true. Like, yeah, the pays in Yugoslavian football were not that high. The level of like professionalism was not that also high yet there were like some quality clubs, and there were a lot of quality players, but it wasn't going in that, it wasn't just following the tempo that you had like in higher European leagues. And it was like really seen that the way our football is functioning, it needs to be changed. And it's hard, like for footballers, they would wait for like the age 28 and then can leave and play in some higher class. But the quality of the league was good, like, because if you have that kind of amount of talent in your country until age 28, that guarantees you a quality league. As for the missing players, I don't know. I think the in the media, there was this pressure. Like it's always like that when there is a catastrophe, then everybody starts like talking about like what could have been done differently. But I don't see what could have been different if I don't know if some other player was there. If it all comes to that Veselinovic was not decisive enough, his idea was not clear. And that thing like with Šestić, definitely like if you don't know like where okay you can change a lot of players, but if you don't have key players and you have like exact roles you have for them, what could you expect? Like what's gonna happen? Even like if you have some bad games, but you know what you want to do, like if you have some kind of idea that you want to materialize, then you stuck to it and then wait for the result. But because if a good result is something that you want to build on. Then sometimes it's just like a pure luck that could happen. So those victories against Portugal and Spain, okay, yeah, those were important, but those are friendlies. They do not count. Maybe you got lucky back then. I don't know. Also discussing that the match against Belgium, that Belgium had luck in that game. I don't know, like the last team that could have talked about having luck and that Euro Championship was definitely Yugoslavia. By the way, they qualified for that Euro Championship.
Did Veselinovic's reputation suffer afterwards because of these Euros?
Yeah, I would say yes because it was like it's the way of this bad result and this especially this changing of the players was just like that was always something that was mentioned about him, and he was like perceived as not that. Even now, like some older like with football experts who talk about how his tenure was really bad and how he was not a coach up to the task. That was not that good of a coach at all. Not just because of the fact that he called that many players, but also because the football that was being played was not modern at all. It was like very old fashioned, and he as a coach didn't really perform in a good way. He had an interesting, I would say, like interesting managerial career because he was afterwards went to Turkey and he won the title next year. Like that was with Fenerbahce, but it was not that kind of I don't know. It wasn't that. It was like more interesting, like the results, the fact that he was in Turkey, he was in Greece, he was in Colombia, like things like that. But it was not. He was not like really remembered as one of the greatest coaches in my town. I say played for Vojvodina. When we talk about Veselinovic, we talk about his playing career, which is the one that you cannot say anything against it. His time in Vojvodina and his time in Yugoslavia National Team was really, he was one of the most important players in that period.
In closing, is this regarded as one of Yugoslavia's greatest fiascos at the finals of a major tournament?
Yeah, naturally, yeah, definitely, yes. As I said, like the World Cup 1982, that was maybe the biggest disappointment because the expectations were really high. But when we talk about by the level of the performance, 1984 was definitely the worst big tournament Yugoslavia participated on. So yeah, the fiasco would be the appropriate word. I think that at that point, I think that in Yugoslavian public was like that. We are never going to win anything. So there's something that it's going to be always like that. We're going to be like we will have all high expectations. We will some games we will be like really really good, but when you really need to perform, we won't. And it was just kind of a. But yeah, luckily for Yugoslavian football, it wasn't like that. In 1987, that youth team won the World Cup. 1991, Red Star won the European Cup. The 90s were like promising a lot, but we know for what reason nothing happened in that period. But yeah, I would say like those two competitions, 1982, 1984, biggest defeats. But I think that from them came something positive because that idea that everything should be done like through inspiration and just like without any strategy, without any kind of a modern tactical approach, you cannot expect results. I think that these two competitions, these results in these two competitions, helped that these kind of things that were for decades a problem in Yugoslavia football would change.
With that, I would like to thank you for your participation in this interview. As always, feel free to leave questions and comments. All our contact information and relevant links will be on the blog and podcast uploads. So, thank you very much and hope to continue these discussions on Yugoslavian football history.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to talk about this topic. I enjoyed your channel preparing for this podcast. I like to talk about Yugoslavian football whenever I have the opportunity. So thank you for giving me that opportunity.
Thank you again. Thank you.